Hello everyone, today is probably going to be a bit of a longer video, and we're going to talk about a variety of things that are all related to a similar topic. There's going to be some questions to go along with this one, as well as you may want to take notes, as there's going to be a lot of information in this video. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is ecological pyramids. So ecological pyramids are discussing a structure in ecosystems that we can use to explain kind of interactions between organisms and how things are happening. So an ecological pyramid, before we talk about the actual pyramid, we got to talk about two different types of organisms. So we're going to classify organisms under two things as either producers or consumers. So producers are things like plants and trees and algae, things that photosynthesize and make their own energy. So they're able to use the sun's energy to create food to sustain themselves. They don't need anything extra. So they don't need to eat anything, they don't need to consume anything. They just, if their conditions are right and they're in the sun, they can keep living forever. Just like if a human would stop eating, if we would stop eating, we would eventually not be able to sustain ourselves and we would die. Plants, as long as their conditions are right, they don't need to keep eating other animals or other plants. They're just the way they are. So plants, photosynthesizers, make their own energy. They're producers. Consumers must consume other organisms to gain energy, like humans, like animals, etc. All right. Here we have our ecological pyramid, or our ecological triangle, whatever you'd like to call it. So we're going to start by talking about what's on the bottom, and we're going to work our way up. So first things first, we have the very bottom is primary producers. So like we talked about before, producers create their own energy. So the primary producers are the main ones creating their own energy. So these are mostly plants, algae, etc. These organisms can create their own food, their own energy through the process of photosynthesis, gaining that energy from the sun, using carbon dioxide and water, converting it into food. So they're going to be generating the most energy. So the next up, we have primary consumers. So these are often herbivores. They only eat plant material. They're usually very smaller, and they derive all their energy from consuming primary producers. So I have a little mouse drawn on there. So this could be little mice. This could be little fish. This could be a variety of small organisms that only eat plant life or get all their energy from the primary producers. So next up, we have secondary consumers. So these could be omnivores. These could be small carnivores. So herbivores, like we said before, means that they eat plant material. Omnivores means that they could eat plant or berries as well as animals. So they eat lots of different things. They aren't just plants or just meat. And carnivores means they gain all of their energy, or they only eat other organisms, other animals, quote-unquote meat. So these secondary consumers could be omnivores and they could be carnivores, and they're going to generate their energy by eating the primary producers and the primary consumers. So the primary producers and the primary consumers. So they're going to get their energy from eating the first two levels of the pyramid. And they're secondary because they are the secondary thing that is a consumer. So they are a consumer. So tertiary consumers and other consumers beyond that. Tertiary just means third in order. There can be more levels depending on the ecosystem or what's happening. Tertiary consumers also consume what's below them. So they'll be consuming mostly secondary consumers. By the time you get to tertiary consumers or above, most of these are actually strictly carnivores, and they're only going to be eating the other consumers, but some of them are omnivores as well. At the top of the pyramid, we have the apex predators. So apex predators are at the top, and they have nothing else that will consume them. So like a bear or like a human, generally nothing else in our environments eat us. We are the apex predators, or a bear is an apex predator. This could be a wolf. This could be like a killer whale, something that nothing else will hunt or nothing else will consume. Some of these, like a bear, is actually an omnivore, but most of these will be carnivores, and they will consume the other levels of the pyramid below them. So as you can see, the pyramid starts thick at the bottom and it grows skinnier by the top. And so as you're going up and up the pyramid, there's less and less organisms actually able to be sustained at that level. Looking at the arrows on the side where it says energy loss, this is saying that there will always be some energy lost in the system. As we breathe, as we generate our own heat, being mammals, as we go about our business, as we keep walking, running, we need energy in order to do those things, and besides just what's sustaining us and keeping us alive. So if we lay in one spot and did absolutely nothing, we would only have to consume a certain amount of food to keep us alive. Well, we do way more than that. So there's always some energy lost out of the system. So because of that, it's never a perfect transition from primary producers to consumers and etc. as you go up the pyramid. You always need much more energy from the level below to support the organisms above. So for example, you may have to have like 1,000 plants in order to sustain 100 mice, and you may need 100 mice to sustain only 10 foxes, and 10 foxes sustain 1 wolf, and 1 wolf maybe sustains something above it, but that's the apex predator. So as you're going up the system, you can only have less and less organisms because there's not enough energy to sustain more organisms, because it's not a very good ratio in order to convert that. Along the side, also, you see that there's decomposers and scavengers. So there's not always like not every single mouse will get eaten by a wolf or eaten by a fox, say. So some of them are just going to die, or they're going to die from sickness or old age. And that's where decomposers and scavengers come in. They're going to recycle all these other organisms, turn them back into nutrients, and allow the primary producers to regain that energy, regain that carbon, and put it back into the system. So back to energy up through the pyramid. This is why you'll see, if you're looking at populations of animals, there's always a much smaller population of animals in an ecosystem of the apex predators or the tertiary consumers, opposed to being like primary consumers or primary producers, because there isn't that kind of energy resource in order for them to sustain themselves. Similarly, this is why if you've ever heard someone saying that cows or eating beef are bad for the environment, this can be a little bit part of that explanation. So besides the fact that cows can give off a large amount of methane gas, which contributes to greenhouse gases, and they consume a large amount of water, which is not good for water conservation, cows also require a lot of energy to be sustained or to grow and to get big. So cows are a secondary consumer. However, they need to eat large amounts of grain, grass, and feed in order to be sustained, to grow nice and big and make good steaks and burgers if we're eating them. So to create 1 burger's worth of beef, it requires the consumption of the cow to eat about 6 kilograms of grain, or about 13 pounds of grain, which is the weight of an average cat or a gallon of paint. So much bigger than this burger. So these cows need to eat a lot of energy in order to grow big and to produce a lot, or to produce to get bigger. So in order to sustain themselves as well as to get bigger, we have to feed them a lot of energy. So when we're growing feed just to feed to cows to make food, we'd probably be better off just growing that grain and eating it for ourselves. It would be a much better energy transaction, and it would be less wasteful. If you're more interested about this, or about where our food or the meat that we eat comes from and some energy and stuff like that, there's a really, really good video that you could watch. I'm going to link the YouTube link in this description, and there'll be a little thing about that, and so you can go and check that out after this if you'd like. Okay, next up we have something that you've probably seen before, and this is like a food web. So if you ever heard of the food chain or a food web, this is an example of something like that. A food chain is important, or a food web is important, because it's describing the interactions between these different producers and consumers. So unlike the pyramid like we had before, typically in these situations, you'll actually see a lot of mixing and matching. So you'll actually maybe have a tertiary consumer consuming just primary consumers, or you'll have a secondary consumer also being consumed by a tertiary as well as consuming primary. So there's a lot of movement around there, as you can see, like insects and plants. Different things are eaten by different things. You could have a deer that may actually end up eating a few little insects, but also will eat these plants and this plant life, and that is consumed by the apex predator or something like that. So the food web, if we're ever talking about a food web or a food map, this is discussing how these interactions evolve and what's consuming what, or where are things getting their energy from. So this will lead us into our last 2 important topics for today, and these are bioaccumulation and Tropic's Cascade. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute. So first of all, we're going to talk about bioaccumulation. So bioaccumulation is referring to the gradual accumulation or gaining of substances in an organism. This is often very bad for organisms, as the substances are often harmful chemicals. They're pesticides, they're hard metals like mercury, they're stuff that are going to create sickness in animals, they're going to lead to organ failure and probably death. So bioaccumulation is tied very closely to the ecological pyramid, and it can be explained through the pyramid. So here we're taking this river system, and this river system has this oil or this chemical spill that is being leaked into it. So there's harmful chemicals and harmful runoff leaching into the groundwater, running into the river, etc. So in this water, there's little algae and microorganisms that are picking up these chemicals as their nutrients, as part of their nutrients through the water. So these these would be photosynthetic, and these would be considered our primary producers if we remember back to the pyramid. So that's the bottom level, the primary producers. So they take in this chemical, and then they're going to be eaten by this little shrimp. So the little shrimp will eat them. It'll also gain a bit of that chemical, and it'll be sustained. So that will be considered the primary consumer. So next up, we have a few different fish, and as the fish keep going on and on and on, there's more and more building up inside of it. And then finally, we have our apex predator, the bear. So if you notice, the red spot gets a little bit bigger as it goes along. And this is because, if you remember back to that pyramid, as you're going up the levels, they need to consume more and more of the thing before it in order to sustain themselves. So like that shrimp needs to consume a certain amount of the algae, but the fish is going to have to consume a lot of shrimp, and the bigger fish a lot more fish, and then finally the big bear has to eat quite a few of these shrimp that has picked up a lot of this chemical as it's gone along. So even though the chemical may not be very harmful in the microorganisms or in the small shrimp, because it's not a very large amount, by the time it gets to the bear, there's a lot of that chemical in the bear, and that can be really harmful for the bear, and it can build up and then it can kill off the top level. So this is called bioaccumulation, when harmful substances are built up along through the pyramid and are gained, and then the final apex predator or the tertiary consumer, whoever's on the top, has a lot of this bad chemical within their body. When you have bioaccumulation in an environment such as this one, this can lead to something called Tropic Cascade. So in this given case, say the bear dies off. So when the bear dies off, it's got a lot of this chemical within its body, and it's dead. So what's going to happen then is the bigger fishes are not going to have as many things eating them. There's not going to be bears eating them. So there's going to grow more and more of those. They're going to keep reproducing, and they're going to have a lot of these big fishes. Well, the big fishes are going to eat the little fishes, and then with the little fishes gone, the big fishes are going to die off. So then you get to this point where if you lose one type of species or an important species goes down, you're going to have the big fishes are going to eat all the little fishes, and they're going to be all gone. So then you're going to have a lot of shrimp maybe in the water and a lot of big fishes, but nothing else. But then the big fishes are going to die off because there's no little fishes to eat, and then you're going to get stuck in this spot where all these species are going to die off, and then the environment's going to lose a lot of its species. And often this happens if an important species dies, and this important species is called a keystone species. So if one of these keystone species are gone, a lot of other species are going to die off, and you're going to get something called Tropic Cascade. So the important things to take from this is bioaccumulation is gaining that substance, accumulating through the pyramid up, and then you'll finally have a substance that a lot of this bad, harmful substance in their body. That's a bioaccumulation. Tropic Cascade is when an important species, a keystone species, dies off, and it has a chain reaction which takes out most of the rest of the ecosystem. If you want to watch a really, really cool video about keystone species, particularly wolves in Yellowstone National Park, in the northwestern states, I'm going to link another YouTube video down below. You can go check it out. It's really sweet. It's a good video. But that's what we have for today. There's going to be some questions on bioaccumulation, on Tropic Cascade, and on ecological pyramids. So I hope you have a great Easter weekend. And yeah, that's it for now. Thank you.